You are the royal embalmer of Marenthos, summoned at midnight to the forbidden east wing of the palace. The year is 1791. The empire is crumbling and the king is dead, but your duty has only begun. As you approach the chamber, the guards won't meet your eyes. Something in the air feels cursed. Inside, Queen Alienora stands pale and motionless beside a draped figure. Her voice trembles. Do not touch the crown. Only preserve what lies beneath. You peel back the silk. What you see makes you stagger. It is not the face of King Aldric IV that strikes you. It's what his robes fail to hide. The thing that haunted his marriages, terrified his lovers, and drove priests to silence the malformed symbol of his reign. A grotesque, unnatural anatomy so monstrous it had become a state secret, whispered only by widows and midwives. As your hands shake above the corpse, you understand this isn't just a body. It's the rotting proof of a reign that deformed an entire empire from bedroom to battlefield. The kingdom of Marenthos was not born from glory, but from obsession. A cold, rain-drenched land nestled between collapsing empires, Marenthos built its dynasty not on war or faith, but on blood. Generations of kings and queens obsessed over purity. Bloodlines were kept within the palace walls. Cousins married cousins. Siblings in secret became lovers. From cradle to crown, the royal family viewed their lineage as sacred, untouched, unspoiled, and perfectly preserved. But blood, when sealed too tightly, turns foul. By the late 1700s, the royal line of Marenthos had become something grotesque. Children were born pale, sickly, and quiet. Ears too low, eyes too close. Physicians recorded strange abnormalities, but were sworn to secrecy. The capital, virulent, still paraded its nobility through golden streets, but behind closed doors the palace whispered of deformities and disappearances. Infants who did not cry, brides who did not survive their wedding night, a dynasty held together by denial. Then came Aldric IV. He was born during a winter so harsh that wolves came down from the mountains and wandered into village squares. His mother died screaming. His father, King Corvin, refused to look upon the child, saying only the blood is curdled. And yet Aldric lived. Not only lived, he grew. Tall, broad, fierce-eyed. He was, by appearance, the first healthy heir in generations. The court called him the Reversal. The people called him God's second breath. But they didn't see what the midwives saw. From the moment he was born, Aldric bore a mark of the curse, hidden from public view, but horrifying to those who knew. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, with his anatomy. It wasn't illness or weakness. It was the opposite, an excess. A malformation so severe, so obscene, that midwives crossed themselves and burned their bloodied linens. Rumors spread like rot. Nurses were dismissed. Some disappeared. A few were buried in silence, their deaths labeled as consumption. And so Aldric's life began in shadow. As a child, he was bright, curious, and cunning. But he was never allowed to undress before others, not even his tutors. His chamber doors were locked from the outside at night. He was forbidden from playing with other royal children. Behind the smiles of the court, people whispered of a prince blessed by the devil himself. Aldric sensed it. He learned to hide not only his body, but his rage. By the age of 12, he had stopped smiling. By 15, he stopped asking questions. By 17, he had grown into a silent, imposing figure with eyes that watched everything and trusted nothing. The court hoped that time would soften him, that marriage might normalize him. They were wrong. Aldric's secret was not a phase. It was a prophecy. one carved into flesh and sealed by centuries of prideful blood. And the kingdom had no idea the storm that was coming. The royal physicians called it a distortion of unholy scale. No one dared write more than that in official records. But behind sealed doors and locked ledgers, the truth of Aldric's curse was known. His deformity wasn't just unusual, it was monstrous. A grotesque overdevelopment of his most private organ, misshapen in ways that defied human anatomy. Thick, serpentine, unevenly swollen, and curved at angles no natural body should bear. It hung like a weight, not just between his legs, but over his entire existence. He had been born with it, and as he grew, so did it. By the time he reached adolescence, the condition was impossible to ignore. The palace seamstresses were ordered to tailor garments with reinforced linings. Saddle makers were brought in to design chairs and thrones that would accommodate his painful posture. Walking became awkward. Riding horses became a hazard. His gait grew stiff, unnatural. Every step reminded him of what he carried. But it was not the weight alone that tormented him, it was the shame. In Morenthos, manhood was sacred. Strength, virility, and noble bearing were qualities celebrated in sculpture and scripture. But Aldric's manhood was not a symbol of strength. It was a deformity whispered about by servants, feared by women, and dissected by physicians who spoke in hushed tones. As a young prince, he once caught two stable boys laughing behind the stables after spying on him during a fitting. That night they vanished. Their families were given silence and silver. No one laughed again. When Aldric turned 16, his father summoned a private council of midwives, healers, and scholars from across the empire. The purpose was simple: assess whether the prince could ever father children. The result was devastating. One by one, the experts confirmed that natural intercourse would likely be impossible. The sheer scale and unnatural curvature of Aldric's organ made even basic intimacy dangerous. One surgeon compared the anatomy to a horned beast coiled in agony. Another simply called it a living contradiction. But King Corvin refused to accept this fate. The bloodline had to continue. So they devised a solution, or the illusion of one. Artisans were commissioned in secret to create what they politely called the royal instruments. Special leather-bound supports, iron-buckled girdles, hollowed cushions, and guided rails carved from walnut wood. Physicians experimented with oils, powders, and numbing agents. One Dutch inventor even presented a wooden device that resembled a siege ram in miniature. Aldric was subjected to fittings like a warhorse. The royal bedchamber became more laboratory than sanctuary. Aldric endured it all in silence. But inside, something was breaking. He became obsessed with finding a cure. He imported scrolls from lost Eastern libraries. He bathed in potions of crushed pearl, horse marrow, and opium-laced wine. He permitted surgeons to conduct painful procedures, incisions, weightings, stretching, cauterizations, anything that might shrink or reshape the thing that had stolen his humanity. Each failure etched deeper scars across his body and mind. At night, alone in his chamber, he would stare at his own reflection, fists clenched, lips trembling. He began speaking to it, not as a part of himself, but as a separate entity. A demon, a parasite, a curse passed down from ancestors who had mocked the gods with their incest and arrogance. He once carved into a mirror with his signet ring the words, "This is not mine. It owns me." By 18, Aldric had grown cold. Controlled. Perfect in public. Dead in private. The deformity no longer shocked him. It consumed him. He wasn't merely hiding a secret. He had become it. They called her Lady Seraphine of Kale, a noble woman with golden eyes and a voice like spring rain. At 16, she was chosen from among 12 eligible brides to marry Aldric, not for love, not even for politics, but for one purpose only, to bear the heir of Morenthos. The court celebrated the match with anxious joy. Whispers had spread of Aldric's health, his strength, his towering presence. None dared speak of his secret, but everyone hoped this marriage would undo the curse that had hovered over the throne for generations. The wedding was magnificent. Cathedral bells rang through the city. The people cheered. From the outside, Aldrich looked regal, almost divine. But inside the palace, preparations had begun for something far more disturbing. Seraphine's ladies-in-waiting were given strict instructions. A physician, not a midwife, oversaw her bridal education. She was told that her husband had special needs, that she mustn't be afraid, that everything had been arranged. When she asked what exactly was wrong, no one would answer. The room smelled of lavender and laudanum. Seraphine entered, robed, trembling. Aldrich stood still as a statue. He disrobed. She screamed. One of the attendants later confessed that Seraphine collapsed backward onto a chaise, crying, "That is not a man, that is a beast." She tried to flee, but the heavy palace doors were barred shut. Aldrich did not move. He didn't speak. He merely waited. Physicians were summoned. They administered laudanum to calm her. She was gently guided back to the bed, her face ghost pale, her hands trembling. What followed was not a wedding night, it was a procedure. The custom-made supports were placed. Seraphine was positioned carefully, surrounded by her attendants, weeping softly under her breath. Aldrich's physician stood nearby, issuing quiet instructions like a conductor. The act was clinical, slow, and silent, punctuated only by Seraphine's gasps and the sound of shifting restraints. When it was done, Aldrich withdrew without a word. He returned to his chambers alone. Seraphine would not speak for 3 days. Her hands shook whenever anyone approached her. The Queen Dowager ordered prayers. The court chaplain described her as possessed by the memory of something unnatural. Physicians declared the attempt successful technically, but Seraphine would never recover. She began avoiding mirrors, refused to wear white, refused to eat unless alone. Her health declined. She developed fevers with no known cause, sudden nosebleeds, hallucinations. She would whisper strange phrases, "It coils," or "Don't let it find me again." Some believed she was cursed. Others believed she had seen something no one should survive seeing. Aldrich, for his part, never asked for her again. He considered the attempt complete. She had fulfilled her duty, whether she bore fruit or not. And Seraphine? She was sent away to a quiet estate in the north. Officially, she was unwell. Unofficially, she had become a living monument to a secret no one dared name. Aldrich had touched another soul and fractured it beyond repair. After Seraphine was sent away, the palace fell into a peculiar silence. There were no public explanations, no mourning, no scandals. It was as though she had never existed. The portrait of her once hung beside Aldrich's in the northern gallery. It was quietly removed and burned. The royal bedchamber was sealed. Guests were told it was under renovation. Servants who had assisted in the wedding night ritual were dismissed with generous payments and permanent relocation. Some whispered the kitchens were sent to foreign provinces and told never to return. But while the court turned its face from the queen's ghost, Aldrich turned inward and downward. He became consumed by the idea that his condition was not natural, but designed, a divine punishment or mystical affliction sent by some ancient force to test the bloodline. He began searching for explanations not in medicine, but in prophecy. His library, once filled with histories and military treatises, was emptied. In their place came ancient grimoires, forbidden manuscripts, and pagan scrolls translated from dead tongues. He stopped sleeping. At night, flickering candlelight spilled under the cracks of his chamber doors, casting strange shadows into the corridors. Guards reported hearing low chanting, sometimes in languages no one recognized. There were smells of burning herbs, melted wax, and once, unmistakably, blood. Aldrich had hired a circle of mystics. They came from every corner of the continent: a Persian alchemist, a blind priest from the Red Steppes, a veiled woman who claimed to speak with the unborn. They were paid in gold and secrets. Their purpose was singular: to find a way to make Aldric fertile, not just physically, but cosmically. He believed now that his seed was cursed by the ancestors, and that no womb would accept it unless the heavens were first appeased. The rituals began. The gardens were dug up and replaced with runed circles. Obelisks carved with ancient symbols rose from the reflecting pools. The eastern tower, once used for astronomy, became a ceremonial temple. Even Aldric's body became part of the process. The mystics wrapped him in cloth, painted symbols across his skin, and made him drink bitter mixtures said to balance the soul. He wore stones around his waist. He fasted for days, meditated in ice baths, and whipped himself in penance for the sins of his bloodline. Still, no child came, so he tried again. A new bride was selected, not a noblewoman this time, but a fertile widow from a distant colony, chosen specifically because she had already borne children. She was brought to the palace under the name Elira, and a new chamber was prepared, larger, darker, built beneath the foundation of the old one. This time, Aldric insisted on personally designing the room. He called it the Chamber of Alignment. Its walls were inlaid with polished obsidian. The ceiling was mirrored. The floor was covered in white sand from the eastern coast. 4 stone statues stood at the corners, each carved to represent a celestial body: the ram, the eye, the serpent, and the womb. The bed itself was not a bed at all, but a slab positioned at the exact center of the room, aligned with magnetic north. The night of the attempt, the mystics prepared Elira with oils and narcotics. She was told it was a ritual for the healing of the king's blood. She believed this until she saw him. Aldric entered the room in silence, cloaked in deep crimson robes, his body already anointed. The mystics chanted. The air grew heavy. Elira began to cry. What followed was witnessed only by the king, the mystics, and the guards posted outside who heard too much. Afterward, Aldric emerged with blood on his hands, not his own. He said nothing. Elira was never seen again. The official story said she returned to her homeland, but the staff who cleaned the room afterward found broken restraints, snapped sandalwood beams, and a trail of blood that had been smeared, not cleaned. Aldric returned to his chamber and didn't emerge for 9 days. When he did, he was changed. He spoke softly, walked slowly, began referring to himself in the third person as the vessel. He stopped holding court. He let his ministers rule in his name. He stopped writing laws. He stopped speaking to his mother. He spent hours staring into mirrors or lying motionless on the cold marble floors of his private chapel. The king of Marenthos was still alive, but he was no longer a man. He had become a myth trying to rewrite his flesh. While Aldric vanished deeper into mirrors and rituals, Marenthos began to rot from the inside out. The court, left without direction, splintered into factions. Ministers made decisions based on whispered dreams, forged letters, and private omens. Taxes rose without reason. Laws were passed and then reversed. One week, the church was favored. The next, it was purged. Loyalty became currency, and betrayal became tradition. The people noticed. Villages once proud to serve the crown began sealing their wells when royal messengers approached. Farms were burned to prevent conscription. Border towns defected to neighboring kingdoms. Even the capital, Vorlin, lost its splendor. Markets shrank. The cathedral bells rang less frequently. The roads cracked and were left unrepaired. Aldric no longer cared. His only focus was the lineage, the bloodline, the heir he had not produced. He viewed the kingdom's collapse not as a crisis, but as a necessary shedding, a purge of the weak and disloyal. He believed Marenthos was simply aligning itself with his transformation. If he was becoming something sacred and reborn, then the empire must die and be reborn with him. He began issuing decrees from within his sealed wing, strange ones, edicts banning mirrors in public buildings, a law requiring every pregnant woman in the capital to register with the palace, proclamations assigning numerological value to names, forcing citizens to adopt new spellings. Priests were ordered to replace scripture with fragments from his own writings. Statues were built depicting a crowned serpent holding a cradle. No one understood what they meant, and yet they obeyed, because disobedience meant death. Those who questioned the edicts disappeared. Those who refused to praise the king's divine burden were arrested. When a nobleman publicly mocked one of the new fertility festivals, his wife was found drowned in a river, her mouth filled with sand. It was never confirmed that Aldric had ordered it, but no one ever mocked again. The mystics had become the new court. Their word now held more weight than ministers. Foreign dignitaries returned home confused and horrified, reporting back to their monarchs that Marenthos was no longer a kingdom, it was a cult, an empire worshipping a man who worshipped only himself. Trade alliances crumbled. Embassies closed. Maps were redrawn with Marenthos left blank. Even nature seemed to reject the realm. Crops failed. Rains turned to ash-gray mist. The plague swept through the western provinces, and Aldric's physicians claimed it was the land rejecting illegitimate births. They burned infected villages, they closed roads. The fires could be seen from the towers of Virulun, casting red glows on the horizon like distant hells. And still, Aldric waited. He believed, despite everything, that an heir would come, that the ritual had worked. That Seraphine had been too weak, and Alira too impure, but somewhere, someone would bear him a child. He dreamed of it, spoke of it in letters to no one. He paced the halls at night, whispering, "When the womb aligns, the gate will open." But there was no gate. There was only ruin. By the end of the year, half the kingdom's provinces had declared autonomy. The royal treasury was empty. Bandits ruled the roads. Aldric hadn't been seen in public in over 16 months. The people called him the Hidden One. Children drew his silhouette in chalk on alley walls and spat on it for luck. The king was lost. The empire was unraveling. And all of it, every law, every fire, every broken oath and shattered alliance, had begun in a single room under a canopy of red silk when one man tried to force the heavens to give him a child. By the spring of Aldric's 38th year, Marenthos was a skeleton kingdom. No foreign banners flew at the palace gates. No musicians played in the halls. No incense burned in the cathedral. The marble fountains that once sang through Virulun now leaked rust-stained water into cracked basins. The royal court no longer gathered. Only the mystics remained, old, quiet, and pale from the candlelight they lived under. The king had not spoken in public for over 2 years. He moved like a shadow between chambers, his robes longer now, his beard left uncut. He spoke only to the object of his obsession, the mirror in his private sanctum, a tall, blackened slab of glass encased in wrought iron. It was said he stood before it for hours, whispering, questioning, pleading. His final consort, a girl of 17, brought from a merchant family as tribute, lasted just 8 nights. On the 9th, she attempted to throw herself from the tower. She survived, only to be locked away. When asked why, she screamed through iron bars, "It watches me even when I sleep." Aldric believed she was the one. He had named her the Aligned Vessel. But she never conceived. In the months that followed, his health declined. His eyes became bloodshot. His voice broke mid-sentence. He often forgot where he was, addressing empty chairs as counselors or speaking to long-dead ancestors as if they were present. He ordered a new edict written that the throne of Marenthos could pass not to blood, but to spirit, to whichever soul bore the mark of the curse willingly. It was never ratified. In the final weeks, Aldric refused food. He believed his flesh was no longer necessary, that he was becoming formless, beyond human, beyond hunger. His physicians, once proud and precise, were now terrified old men who took notes with shaking hands. One of them described his final days as a gradual folding of the man into himself. The mystics gathered one last time. They prepared the chamber with symbols of rebirth, ashes, salt, a crown of dried thorn, beams of vines. Aldric entered alone, his body frail, but his eyes blazing with conviction. He lay upon the same obsidian slab where so many rituals had failed and whispered his final request, "Preserve me and let the next king be born from the ruin of my body." He never rose again. When the physicians entered, they found him cold, pale, and smiling. His hands rested on his chest. His mouth held dried blood, and his heart had stopped silently in the night. No one knew the exact cause. Some said starvation. Others said madness. A few believed, against reason, that he had finally willed himself out of existence. His body was not buried. It was embalmed, sealed in black glass, and hidden deep beneath the palace. No tomb was marked, no song was sung. Only a locked door remains, behind which, they say, his shape still lingers. The kingdom, orphaned and fractured, fell to civil war. Regional lords claimed blood rights. Cities declared independence. Marenthos, once feared, became a memory, its borders consumed by others. But Aldric's legend did not die. Centuries later, in hidden corners of old libraries and whispered gatherings of scholars, his name surfaces again. The king who tried to reshape flesh into legacy, the monarch whose body betrayed him and who, in turn, betrayed an entire empire to serve it. In one preserved letter found in the ruins of the Eastern Tower, written in his own hand, Aldric left a final message. "If I could burn the curse from my skin, I would have lit the world on fire." And perhaps, in a way, he did.